The once great kingdom of Boletaria is now rife with demons and soul-hungry abominations, thanks to the king's use of the forbidden soul arts. His actions awoke an ancient demon named the Old One, causing the growth of a thick fog to take root in Boletaria, which would slowly stretch further and further until the entire world is consumed. Word spread about the demons within Boletaria who collected souls to satiate the Old One, but also about the ability to obtain demon souls and the immense power that comes with it. People across the land breach the fog with all kinds of incentives, but what will be yours? The Demon Souls remake was my first real Souls experience, and to give it some more context, my consumption of the fantasy genre typically involves settings and stories on the more light-hearted side of things. They weren't without their moments of darkness, but they were certainly not all doom and gloom. And to be honest, I avoided the Souls series for this reason. I thought absorbing the atmosphere of these harsh game worlds coupled with the notorious level of difficulty would be too much for me to handle. I'm no stranger to dark and depressing themes or challenging gameplay. I just assumed based on their reputation that the games would inflict relentless cruelty on me, and leave me starved of any positive emotion whatsoever. I'm here to tell you that I couldn't have been more wrong. In ways of inspiration for the original Demon Souls, director Hidetaka Miyazaki mentions a few influences in an interview with Eurogamer.
There aren't any other games that I'd cite as inspiration, but there are films like Conan the Barbarian and Excalibur and Frazetta's fantasy art.
Among these inspirations, I wasn't surprised to see Frank Frazetta, one of the most influential fantasy artists, make the list. His powerful depiction of violent battles, Herculean-bodied heroes, and threatening beasts are intense and enthralling. Frazetta is a master in composition and dramatic lighting, portraying dark scenes in vivid colours and stark shadows, resulting in unparalleled depth and detail. Frazetta's work reminds me a lot of Peter Paul Rubens, with destructive mid-action sequences and a focus on mythology. Bundled bodies in the midst of flames and violence are a common motif in his artwork. The human form is reduced to nothing but a mark of suffering. The Demon Souls remake manages to reflect the aesthetics of Frazetta and Rubens perfectly. The use of fire as a light source imitates the same dramatic qualities of their paintings. Deep colours, striking contrast between dark and light, and subject matter all contribute to this too. Overcoming the mighty bosses of the game provides a profound sense of achievement and relief, but that's not what Frazetta and Rubens are necessarily about. Instead, they are fixated on the addictive tension of combat and even demise, both being unavoidable in the gameplay of Demon Souls. Obviously, having not played the original Demon Souls or any Dark Souls game means my relationship and perception of the remake is very different to someone who has. For veteran players, it's only natural to draw comparisons when playing the game, but I'm looking at this as a fresh experience. I'm also not one to view remakes as replacements for original titles, so I'm fairly accepting of change. I see them as two different representations of the same world and story from an older and newer console generation. They're incredibly similar to one another, while at the same time they achieve their oppressive atmospheres in completely different ways. In my opinion, neither of them are any better or worse just because the other exists. Miyazaki created Demon Souls in the vision he wanted, and likewise, Bluepoint made their version of that. I judge them on their own merits because of this. Just by looking at segments of gameplay, the original's world felt desolate and brutal through the less detailed environments and architecture. This results in a feeling of exposure, as the spaces feel emptier in contrast to the remake, with its addition of new richly detailed objects and wider range of colour. It's not to the original's detriment though, since this plays a huge part in the strength of Demon Souls' cruel and oppressive mood, and is undoubtedly successful. The remake, on the other hand, uses visual abundance as a method of making the player feel vulnerable. It leaves you feeling so belittled by the staggering bosses and environments in all their graphical glory. It's almost suffocating, but again, in a way that benefits the atmospheric effect the core game is going for. It's more difficult to see what's hiding in the shadows, and easier to see the horrifying detail in the light. Despite the contrasts in aesthetics, the remake doesn't completely disregard the original's colour palette, as you're able to set filters within photo mode that carry over into your gameplay. In this way, you're able to get a little closer to the original's design just by ways of colour should you choose to. It may not be to the same effect, but it's a nice feature. The game is split into 6 main areas, and despite all the destruction, I wouldn't call Boletaria barren. It's rich with opulent architecture and all sorts of Baroque, Biblical and Gothic influences. There are fiery mining grounds and cold, rainy cliffs, poisonous dark swamps and grandiose structures. Every environment is impressive in its own way, and brimming with enemies trying to kill you. In the game, you'll be making your way to each archstone. It will involve a lot of killing enemies, opening doors and shortcuts, and the conclusion of a boss battle, granting you access to the next archstone should you beat them. The path for the game is well structured and concise, with no area ever overstaying its welcome. During these segments, the gameplay is very demanding for your attention and focus, whether that's due to in-game enemies or invaders, something you only have to worry about if you're in body form. You lose your body and enter your soul form if you die, and the only ways to regain it is to defeat a boss, use a Stone of Ephemeral Eyes, or invade another player's world and kill them. The final method is the most intriguing, showing the desperation to restore one's body by taking it from another player like yourself. It feels greedy, but not without good reason, as being in body form grants you more health and the ability to summon other players for help, which is particularly useful for boss fights you may be stuck on. Moral ambiguity very much surrounds NPCs also, as you can always understand a character's motives, and what better way to make you understand them than by tempting you with it too. The choice of being a friend or foe is given to you in a few different ways, the main being your interactions with other players and NPCs, which is then presented to you through something called your character tendency. It's essentially a scale from white to black, white being a representation of your frequent good deeds and black being the bad ones. Defeating players known as Black Phantoms will tip you towards white, whereas killing harmless NPCs or other players you've invaded will push you towards black. Achieving pure white or pure black character tendency will unlock certain special events and side quests, and in turn different rewards, along with some boosts to HP and attack power. Either one comes with its benefits, so being a good or bad person by these standards is up to you. Demon's Souls has a variation of boss battles, as well as subversions of stereotypical presentations of them. As much as battles were about stats and timing, it also involved a bit of puzzle solving. When I first fought the Fool's Idol, I defeated it only to hear someone mocking me, and then reviving the boss I was relieved I had just beaten. But I heard him echoing from the left side of the church, so I made my way back, entered a very nauseating staircase, and came back to the same building to find the scrawny guy sitting there and manipulating the boss. It was a simple thing, but it completely broke my very autopiloted approach to boss fights, and encouraged me to be more cautious with my future encounters. In the same atypical way, the old monk summons in another player to fight you in their stead, and the dragon god is more of a stealth sequence than anything. The game has its straightforward but no less exciting boss fights too, so it was a pretty nice balance that was struck. Miyazaki is no doubt incredibly passionate about dark fantasy, which translates into Demon's Souls so effortlessly. He explains his own attraction to the genre in a way that perfectly summarises the appeal of it.
It's only my personal taste, but I'm very much drawn to things like King Arthur and Beowulf, and also the Nibelungen, because they're classics. They show the good and evil in the human psyche, and you're made to breathe the unvarnished stench of humanity. They are not trying to put on airs.
This exploration of the more unsavoury sides of human nature are at the heart of dark fantasy, along with an element of horror, although the two come with their differences. Dark fantasies involve a setting that is by default otherworldly, as opposed to the horror genre, which uses a more intrusive approach, the inclusion of a frightening subject in an otherwise normal world. Horror protagonists are more unknowing and unprepared for the terrors they face, whereas dark fantasy usually has characters making their own choices, knowing the risks and consequences, ending up being a more typical hero story. These are of course generalizations, however, and there are certainly exceptions to this. Dark fantasy is able to present very real problems in a fantasy context, mainly that power isn't always used for good, and with new magical or fantastical strength comes violence and suffering beyond compare. Dark fantasy doesn't abandon the grime of the human race like a fairy tale, instead it highlights and examines it in all its grit and despair. However, as cruel as the world of Demon's Souls is, there's still hope. You're able to go against this place of suffering and forge your own path through it, and by the end you have the option to save Boletaria, or succumb to the desire for power. There's no fate of a single ending that dictates your story. You're the one who makes the decision, and having that control isn't an oppressive thing at all. I felt stronger than ever, and not just because I beat the game. King Alunt is an example of the opposite sentiment. His pursuit of power is ironic since he essentially becomes a pathetic lump of flesh, and nothing but a servant to the Old One. He lost hope in the capabilities of humans, and learned the forbidden soul arts, resulting in the demise of his kingdom and himself. Like a once great man in a Peter Paul Rubens painting, he is reduced to a mark of human suffering. Having such a dark and destructive exploration of a genre I've normally experienced in a much more lighthearted tone was a change I didn't know I needed. To say the visual aesthetics of Demon's Souls matches the gameplay is a massive understatement, as both are harsh on the player but rewarding in their own ways. There's a level of complexity that takes some getting used to, particularly in terms of stats and builds. But once I knew this, the game wasn't all that difficult. That's not to say it didn't demand my attention, but I was still able to have my moments to savour the environments I was in, and relish in the details. The game taught me patience in combat and to think outside of the norm that other games have set, but most importantly, it taught me to love dark fantasy.